Money doesn't just come from one place. It drips, trickles, flows, and floods into our lives in different ways. Welcome to Drip Trickle Flow Flood, a podcast that explores the power of multiple income streams. Hey, Tony, how are you today?
Good. How are you, Melissa? What's been going on?
Oh, I'm good. It's just been busy, busy, lots of deadlines. How about you?
Yeah, same thing. I was dealing a lot with my daughter just finished sixth grade, and it's the end of elementary school at her school. So there's just so many things. And then I have 3 writing deadlines here in the next couple days, actually. But actually, they're all written. Just need to get them sent off. And yeah,
That's
got a big
good.
construction project wrapping up. So yeah, lots of things, but it's Washington and it's beautiful this time of year. So I've also been
Yes.
goofing off a lot too.
Yeah, we're in celebration month because it's my husband's birthday, our wedding anniversary, and then my birthday all in a month span. So this is celebration time.
Well, and Gary and Lindsay are my wife and Melissa's husband have the same birthday, which is
Crazy.
pretty random.
Super random, those Geminis. If you're into astrology. I feel like I know 5 people with that same birthday.
Huh.
It's so interesting. There's just definitely something going on that time of
Yeah, I
year.
know a
It's like,
couple other people also. Yeah.
geez, popular day. All right, we have a pretty interesting article to discuss today. So Tony found this article in Yahoo Finance, and it was about a recent episode of The Ramsey Show, so Dave Ramsey's podcast, where a man had called in to share that he bought an $11,000 engagement ring for his fiance using a zero-interest credit card, even though he had $25,000 sitting in a high-yield savings account. So his plan was to just float that payment, earn a little bit of interest, pay it off. But Dave Ramsey had an opinion on that. He was definitely not impressed. He called it dumb. He said, don't play games with debt. And we have thoughts. So, Tony, let's talk about it.
Yeah. The short synopsis is I couldn't disagree more. One of the things that Dave says in the article, specifically this, he's like, well, at most you're going to make $40 a month, that's like one pizza or whatever. And, I just totally disagree with that sentiment of saying it's only $40, because the reality is if you only do $40 10 times, now that's only $400, right? And it all adds up and it compounds, and that's free money. It's literally free money. And yeah, you can get in trouble with debt, but you can get in trouble doing a lot of things. It doesn't mean you don't do them, right? Do you not drive down the street in your car because you might get in a car wreck? You drive safely, and that's going to increase the chances that you don't get in a car wreck. If you're taking on some debt and you're responsible with it, it's free money. So in this instance, this guy saved $25,000. He was savvy enough to go get this 0% credit card, and he seemed totally aware of his plan. Maybe he put a date on his calendar to remind him, this is when I need to pay this thing off. To me, he had checked all the boxes, and to me, it's a brilliant financial move. Is that something that makes you billions of dollars? No, but to me, it's a great start.
Yeah. I mean, maybe so we've done this exact thing. One of our cars, we could have paid cash for, but we ended up getting a loan through we bank through a credit union. So we checked into the rates. We're like, what is it? And it was so low. It was 0.3% or something ridiculous. So we did the math and we're like, okay, so it's going to be 0.3% interest. We can hand over this $30,000 payment to just buy this car cash, right? Or we can keep that $30,000, invest it smartly, you take this super low interest loan and just make sure that those numbers are working out every month. Now, granted, and I know I've said this on the podcast before, my husband is very active in our investing strategy, and it does a lot in a lot of different ways. And we definitely need to have him on to discuss that. but everything from investing in the stock market, trading options, we do some T-bills, things like that. So we're always going to be able to make more money holding on to our money and investing it than just like handing it over on a big lump sum payment. So that's the direction that we went in. I don't know if I think it just depends on the individual situation. Sure, if it's someone who is not going to do those things, who maybe struggles a bit with credit card debt, like maybe that would be a better move for them to just pay the cash. But for those that can put together a pretty simple financial plan around investing your money smartly, I just don't see why you wouldn't put it on especially a 0% credit card, because then you have no interest.
Yeah, and he's talking a 0% credit card. There could have also been rewards attached to that. I don't know. So
Yeah.
I am totally anti carrying credit card debt. I would, people say you have to have the $5,000 or whatever sitting there saving as as a emergency fund. And I see people that do that that are carrying credit card debt. To me, that's totally insane, right? Like, you got to pay off that credit card debt. You can't be paying that high debt. However, the flip side is if credit cards are used and managed properly, they're great. I currently have the Robinhood credit card. I get 3% back on every purchase. And then not only do I get 3% back on every purchase, I'm essentially getting a short-term loan every single month. I have that money sitting in an account that I pay my credit card off every single month. And so I'm never accruing any interest. I'm never accruing any fees. And that money is working for me the entire time, in addition to the added benefits. I haven't always had the cash sitting there to pay those off. And we can talk about this maybe in depth a little more some other time. When we were chatting with Rhea, we talked a little bit about my HELOCs. And I had quite the strategy with debt there, where I literally never had any money in my checking account. In my HELOC, I was operating out of my HELOCs. But that's because I was, again, maximizing the absolute most interest I could be getting on any dollar I ever earned. I think we can talk about credit card debt here. We can talk about this specific situation, but I also think just talking about debt in general, and I don't, Dave's probably not listening to our show yet, but I'm sure he'll be a subscriber soon. And I would love to talk to him about it, because I totally disagree with his perception on debt.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because I felt like in this particular situation, he was framing the answer, and again, like, let me also say, because I come from media, I have a long background in media. I do also understand that sometimes this comes from, like, you have to be a personality in order to build an audience, and so
Yeah.
he may be leaning a bit more into that because he knows what's gonna, like, draw his audience. So let me just say that we're aware that that could be the case here. However, um, I found it very interesting how he was, like, framing his answer here, almost like it was an emotional mistake for the gentleman who called in. Like, it would be kind of gross to put a ring on someone's finger that was financed, right? And I thought that was interesting because for someone who's giving, like, money advice, it's like looping in that emotion, wrapping that emotion into money decisions. I just thought that was an interesting choice on his part to give advice like that.
Yeah, well, especially because, yes, there is emotion in the proposal, but I didn't think there was emotion in this decision at all. It seemed
No.
very sound and strategic, and probably someone that's been listening to Dave maybe for quite a while, and, probably called in proud of what they were doing and then ended up getting ripped, which, and I do understand that, it is a show, it is entertainment. Uh, I mean, frankly, I often read, when I see a Dave Ramsey headline, I read it just to get fired up because I know he's going to say something bad about debt. So let's talk about debt a little bit more in general. One of the things that I had a friend that used Dave Ramsey's, I don't know, bought his book or his plan or whatever it was. And that person became so anti-debt that,
Mhm.
they didn't even want to borrow to buy a house. They didn't want, and to me, and again, there's good debt and bad debt, and you have to manage it. And I think that's why this all really comes back to education. And if you're
Yeah.
educated on debt, then to me, debt's a tool and you have to be using it smart. But I would not be where I was, not even close, without debt. And was there risk? Yeah, there was risk, but I was backing that up with a lot of information, a lot of knowledge, a lot of hard work. Maybe when I first got into it, there was less so of that, but frankly, I had nothing to lose at that point, anyways. When my wife and I first got together, she thought someone stole her identity. She checked her credit and she had all this debt associated with her. She goes, "Oh my gosh, Tony, someone stole my identity. I have all this debt." I go, "What was the number?" And she tells me, I go, "That sounds about right." And she goes, "What?" And I mean, debt had been attached to her. And,
Oh, yeah.
but that debt was the tool I was able to do. Without that leverage, I would not have been able to grow my net worth and my income streams the way I was able to. And so, yes, debt can be a big problem, but if it's managed right, it's also opportunity, and it can take someone that's maybe financially in the lower socioeconomic place or middle class or whatever it is, and you can jump up a class by using that debt correctly. And that's one of the problems that I often have with Dave Ramsey when he does his stuff. It's not that the sentiment is bad. Um, it's kind of like the Mormons don't drink alcohol because it's better for everybody. Some people can handle drinking alcohol, some people can't. So they just say, well, none of us will because of the people that can't, which is a great altruistic mindset. And I feel like that's kind of, Ramsey's approach to debt, where I think that you get educated on it and then you turn what could be a weakness into a strength.
Yes. I like how you said it can be a tool. That's absolutely right. And it probably just depends on the circumstances. I mean, I've talked about on here before that way early in my 20s, I had some credit card debt. At the time, I really didn't have a lot of financial acumen by my own, that's my own fault, right? Because I didn't seek out that information, of course, but I didn't at that time. And so, in order to pay off that debt and pay it off quickly, and this was what I would consider bad debt, like credit card debt, purchasing things that I don't even know what the heck they were at the end of the day. But I think at that time, a Dave Ramsey mindset served me. I don't think I followed him then, but just that idea of like sometimes you have to be like very cold turkey about
Yeah.
things and just say, I've got to get this paid off, debt bad, and it's like sometimes that simplistic mindset can serve you if you are just in that mindset or that place in your life. But if I had stayed in that mindset, that's a problem because then I wouldn't be able to use debt as a tool. We wouldn't be able to build the wealth that we're able to build. It would create so much conflict with my husband, who definitely has more of your mindset, Tony. So, you have to evolve and grow. And so I can appreciate some of what Dave's saying in that there are definitely people out there that can benefit from like this is the message they need to hear right now, but then it doesn't leave opportunity for growth. There's not like a yes and to it. It's like
Right.
there's a
Yeah.
yes but to it, right? It's like it's just like a no. It stops here, right? Like no, 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 you can't like you could do X, but it's going to destroy your financial picture. That's not true. So there's not a yes and to what he's talking about. There's no progression or growth in it. It just you stay stagnant with one belief.
Yeah. And I'm a firm believer of you don't borrow money on a depreciating asset. You don't borrow money for something that disappears like a vacation. To me, that's a very different situation than using a credit card to, intelligently benefit from the points or the cash back or whatever, or to use that credit card so that your money is continuing to make interest. And again, I know that it may be the tiniest little drip of what you're getting in cash back or, in interest or whatever, but the power of compounding interest, and this is how debt works for the lenders, but the power of that compounding interest is so powerful that doing that month over month, year over year for decades of your life, it can be extremely impactful. As you were talking about, like, what kind of debt do you take? And, is it smart? Like your whole thing with the car and what you were going to be paying on the car versus what you could get. Debt and money and finances and all these things, there is emotion, there is all these pieces to it, and it can be very complex. But when you break it down to its simplest form, it's just math. And if you can take the emotion out of it, and you just look at the numbers and you do the math, you can say, yes, borrowing this money makes sense, or no, it doesn't.
Yep.
And it really is just math. And I'm not saying even borrow the money and say, okay, well, the stock market historically gets 10%, blah, 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 or houses get X, Y, and Z. The math has to be more secure than that, right? Like if you're going to be borrowing that money and paying some interest to the lender, you've got to have a guaranteed interest that you're getting elsewhere and an ability to pull that money instantly should you need to pay off if it's a variable rate or whatever.
T-bills.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yes, you're absolutely right. That's why, just like you said, you have to do the math. And it felt like this guest, just looping back for a minute to that Dave Ramsey episode. One thing that guest also said is that he didn't want his to drop below the 25,000 in savings because it would have lowered his interest rate. So I guess and so to me, that was him doing the math. He's like, if I take this chunk out of here, then I'm going to lose this. Excuse me. And, but I thought, so again, that's very interesting that the advice was still, nope, and take it out and pay them. Which again felt like more of an emotional decision than a math decision. It's numbers on the page.
Yeah. And I make those sorts of decisions all the time of where I have my money sitting, how much I have sitting in one place, because often, whether it's a CD or certain bank accounts or whatever it is, you may get benefit from a higher rate if you have more in there. And the flip is the same also. If you're putting down payment on a house, if you can get up to a certain number, generally that's 20%, you're probably going to get a better interest rate. You're going to get rid of mortgage insurance, those sorts of things. I kind of buy differently now. I mean, Dave probably hates it. I usually borrow all the money from leveraging houses with a block to buy now. But I would try as hard as I could to get to that 25% down because I would get a break on my interest. And, your cash on cash return, maybe that looks worth in the short term, but over the life of a loan, if you look at the value of that, even a couple points or a couple fraction of a points, it does have a big impact. And there is also a level of security, which I think Dave would probably agree with me on, right? That if you're, putting more down, you are putting a level of security there behind buying that house. But so, yeah, it's very interesting, the fear that people have of debt. And I think that fear is around that lack of education around it. And I hope that in schools, on podcasts, in books, more of that is, discussed. And you and I have talked about this, is trying to make those financial discussions normal and having those chats, friends, family, spouses, bankers, financial advisors, whoever it is, making those conversations normal so that you can get more educated. You could talk through. I mean, I have no qualm at all calling up Gary and chatting with him about some sort of financial decision and bouncing ideas off of each other.
Oh yeah.
And I think that should be more the norm. And, every time that happens, you end up learning stuff from each other because people are consuming different information, have different backgrounds.
I agree. More honest conversations and more of that. Like, I don't love like the black and white of everything. Maybe this is a broader topic, but it feels in some ways like we move towards that nowadays where there's not a lot of like the middle, the gray area, the critical thinking. It becomes more like this bad, this good, very black and white. And so in this conversation around debt, it's like debt bad, no
Yeah.
debt good. And that just isn't the case with this, nor with really most things, right? Like everything has like a gray area. So the more that we can just get curious and explore and say, oh, maybe there are instances where debt can be used as a tool, where debt could be quote unquote positive in some way. And what are those? And just getting curious to explore that. I think someone can still hold the belief that they don't want debt. That's fine, right?
Well,
If they ultimately decide, but at least get curious about it.
yeah, I totally agree. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with not utilizing debt. I just think people should be aware of the opportunity that debt might be able to give them. But then there are added stressors, and there are things that can impact that as well. It's just it has been such a useful tool for me. Uh,
Mhm.
I really do. I hope that people do get educated on it and look at it and see it as an opportunity. Because frankly, you can out borrow what you can earn, and it does give you
Yes.
it gives you the buying power.
Yes. And we have to obviously be very careful with with how we're managing that. But again, it's all numbers on the page, and having open conversations. And it's interesting because there is also a stigma. I deal with this a lot when I write scripts. And when we're looking for like what's a motive, I write thrillers. So it's like what's a motive for someone to do something very bad, which is usually in my thrillers to murder someone because we have to do that, right? That has to be the story. And so a lot of times we use this like element of financial infidelity of some sort, right? Like one partner is hiding some kind of like really terrible decision from the other partner that then put them in this like terrible debt. And it's so interesting because at the end of the day, if they had just talked about it, it would have been fine if they were having like open conversations. But we use that like financial infidelity all the time. So like again, I'm curious now around this because debt is such a big conversation that needs to be had within partnerships or marriages, but often is very shrouded in secrecy. Do you have any tips or resources around that? Like, how can people have more open conversations around it and their feelings around it with their partner?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of funny, when I had a pretty strong feeling about it when Lindsay and I first got together, I guess in our mid to late 20s. She had a car loan.
Mm.
And I mean, it's kind of funny when I say it out loud. I was like, what on earth? You have a car loan? And so I instantly paid off her car loan. And then she found out that I had massive amounts of real estate debt. So,
I thought her identity was stolen.
yeah. And so but I think just talking about what's important, we were talking about the work optional book the other
Yeah.
previous podcast, and I've since started reading that and just talking about like what's important, how to, and really looking at your life, right? And maybe taking on debt isn't the way you want to operate because of the stress, the timeline that maybe is associated with that. There are some factors to that. So it's really looking at what's important, what are we going to spend our money on? And I think it's about building the team and having those conversations. I had friends that they would go, I don't know if it was once a month or how often, but they had a gaggle of kids, or they have a gaggle of kids, and they would go out and they called it their business meeting, and once a month, and they would go out and they would talk about their finances. They'd find a babysitter and they'd go have that discussion. I think a lot of the fear that can come around finances, if you are building that team that I talk about a lot with a banker that you can trust and a financial advisor, maybe a financial coach, all of those things, a lender that you can trust, that can dissipate a lot of the risk and the fear and open up those discussions. And hopefully the spouse or the significant other is a part of those discussions as well. And you can include parents, kids, all of those pieces as well.
Yeah, I like that concept of like having those dates where you get together and talk about money. So that could be like within your partnership with your spouse, it could be within your family or with external partners too, like you said. And I know my husband, it created like a little finance. I mean, it's just him and one other person. But they have like a little finance club where they meet every week or every other week and they just talk about just all different topics, kind of like we do on this podcast. And then he had another friend who became aware that this existed, and she's like, "Can I join?" And I thought that was really fun because there aren't that many forums where you can discuss these kinds of things. And I think in a non-intimidating environment too, right? Like how many places can you go and talk about the topic of like debt, like is debt bad? And talk about it in like a very honest way, looking at the complexities and different situations. That doesn't really exist. A lot of the folks that loop up and talk maybe have a bit of more of an advanced view, or they're investors already, or something where like the average person who's just getting started with this wouldn't necessarily want to enter that room just yet.
Well, maybe this is something that we need to do with Drip Trickle Flow Flood and
Yeah.
get some group forums together and open up the discussion. I like that idea. And
Yeah. Like,
uh,
all right. Well, you let us know, listeners, because we can
yeah,
open
let
up
us
an
know if
online group.
you want to be a part of that. That could be a pretty fun and I think beneficial activity to do.
Yeah, I think so too. Any other thoughts on Dat and Dave Ramsey?
I mean, just that I have strong feelings about debt. I'm just a strong believer that there is good debt and bad debt, and I guess we can leave it at that for today.
Absolutely. And we'll tackle this topic in other episodes as well, because debt is just obviously an ongoing discussion. But if you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review on your favorite podcast platform. Thank you for joining us today, listeners, and we'll see you in the next episode of Drip Trickle Flow Flood. Thanks so much.